Members, and call this meeting to order. We're resuming meeting number 87, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance and the debate on motion of P.S. Beach, the amendment of MP Blakey, and the sub-amendment of MP Morantz in relation to the study of Bill C-47. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For the members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. And I do see a hand up, MP Baker, but I do have the speaking order right now. I've got MP Perkins and then MP Lawrence. And then I had, and then, what's it? So, okay, and then MP Baker, and then MP Baker, and then MP Blakey. Yeah. Okay. So.
People are just joining us, or the sub of the amendment we're dealing with.
We're
speaking to the amendment still, are we not? I think.
Yeah, you're speaking to the amendment and the sub-amendment by MP Morantz. Right. So if you'd like to read it into the record or speak to it, go ahead. Go ahead. For those watching.
Well, I won't perhaps bore those watching with the thing, and it does feel, I'm sure, like to some members that I have been speaking for all 87 meetings of the Finance Committee, but it hasn't been that many.
Rick, do you want to let the Liberals talk? You can pick it back up just to see what they're saying.
Okay, we'll just do it. So just to sort of summarize for those watching, what I've been speaking about is the desire to have under this sub-amendment and amendment to the main motion by Mr. Beach, of having what we believe to be an important discussion about ministerial accountability to Parliament. We've been, as the official opposition, requesting that the Minister of Finance come on her Bill C-47, which is the Budget Implementation Act. It's an omnibus bill that amends 51 acts of Canada, some of which have to do with finances, some of which don't. We've been seeking 2 hours for the minister to speak on a fiscal plan that was presented to Parliament that requests or plans to spend $3.1 trillion in the next 5 years. And the reason we're asking for 2, and I understand that the minister has agreed to appear, which is heartening because we have been in a search for Freeland, but that the minister has agreed but won't commit to 2 hours instead of 1. And this whole discussion about ministerial accountability could be solved right now if the minister agreed to appear for 2 hours, which we've been unable to get confirmation of. Perhaps some of the members of the government or the chair could confirm whether we've received an update from the minister of whether she's agreed to come for 2 hours, as opposed to the last email, which I understand we got from her. That is, yeah.
I just want to clarify for my friend across the way, because I don't want him to be confused. The Deputy Prime Minister responded to the invitation that was part of the motion that we all passed, right, which had no specified time. The will of the committee to invite the minister to appear for 2 hours is, in fact, the amendment that you've been actively filibustering for 23 hours or so. So if we can vote, then we could send the invitation, and then we could see what the response is.
On that point of order, perhaps the chair could confirm whether any amount of time has been committed to by the finance minister with respect to her invitation.
So what I can tell the member is that the minister has emailed the committee and has accepted the invitation to come in on May 16th, which would be next Tuesday.
So no time has been committed to. And I have respect for the parliamentary secretary, and I believe he's in the same party as the finance minister, and I would suspect they communicate on a regular basis, or I would hope so, for the functioning of our government. And so if he's willing to guarantee today on record that she will be here for 2 hours, we can move forward.
Mr. Chair, obviously, committees are independent. It would be improper for a parliamentary secretary to go against a will of the committee. So once we have the vote of all members and we understand the will of the committee, we'd be able to act.
Thank you, P.S. Beach. Back to MP Perkins.
Well, we appear to be in a bit of a chicken and the egg scenario, it sounds like. And I know that I personally asked questions of the government in the House on Tuesday. A simple question: would the minister be willing to appear for 2 hours? And unfortunately, the minister was unable to answer that question, not because she said something else, but because the government had the Minister of Tourism stand up and answer the question. And I was quite happy that the Minister of Tourism had clearly read some of my interventions and mentioned the important issue of the lack of policing of Elvers as one of the things that we had discussed, which is going on. By the way, the Minister of Fisheries got another email this morning, 25 days since the shutdown of the fishery, 24 emails on the Elver fishery not being enforced. In fact, the RCMP are refusing to take calls now across my riding in the detachments. The media are even calling them, and the RCMP are saying no. But maybe I'll come back to that, because I want to make sure those who are watching understand what this is about and the importance of this. And the reason that we're skeptical, because we can't get a 2-hour commitment from the minister when she wants to spend $500 billion a year, $3.1 trillion over the next 2 years. Perhaps it's because she's embarrassed it's such a bad budget, because in the fiscal plan outlined only 6 months ago, we haven't seen her in 6 months, but since the fiscal plan outlined 6 months ago, where the minister projected we would have a balanced budget within the 5-year fiscal framework, then now is not actually projected. Now, I guess she had advance notice of the resolution at the Liberal Party convention, which was defeated. Perhaps she played a role in defeating it, that asked for the government, their own party, asked for the government to present a plan to balance the budget. And in the wisdom of the Liberal Party of Canada, they thought that was an unreasonable request from their own members and defeated it. And so perhaps that's why the minister won't come to defend this bad budget for 2 hours. And to understand that, I mentioned that she hadn't been here in 6 months. So I just want people who are watching to understand what that means. The committee very pleasantly invited the minister over the last 6 months 3 times to appear. She blew off, as I said in the House, she blew off every invitation. So what were those invitations of ministerial accountability, which is what the sub-amendment, the amendment are about, in trying to put some accountability into MP Beach's resolution, is that on February 2nd, this committee invited the minister to appear in the same meeting as the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklin, to discuss inflation. Probably the most important issue to Canadians right now. Without a doubt, it is the most important issue to Canadians. People are suffering under the food inflation caused by the spending of this fiscal plan. The food inflation that has seen food normalize its inflation at 10% price inflation, which is causing people to have to choose. And we all get calls every day of people who are having to choose between heating their home or even having a home and eating, between having to put milk in their water in the children's milk. A terrible thing that they're facing now with regard to what this government, who proposes or supposes to care about Canada's less fortunate people, is actually imposing the greatest burden of financial harm in this country because of their lack of recognition of what the spending is. And perhaps maybe that's the reason we're having trouble finding Freeland in this committee, because she does not maybe agree with the budget that that she had to present. Maybe maybe it was the issue that was raised a few meetings ago that this is really about freeing Freeland to do what she thinks is right from the PMO dictates. Because as we know from the Treasury Board document I read earlier, absences have to be approved by the Prime Minister's office, and clearly they've been approving a lot. The second invitation was on March 7th, when the committee invited the minister to appear to defend her main estimates. And for those who don't understand what that is, main estimates are the actual spending plan. The budget is a budget. It's a broad, big document that sets out what they expect, the government expects revenue to be, what the government expects, where they plan to spend money, what they think the economic projections for the economy is that will result in this supposed performance. By the way, which the government has missed every single target in every single budget that is set out. Because you can remember in this fine document that I think about 130 Liberals were elected on in 2015. Remember when they used to talk about working for those who are in the middle class and those who are aspiring to get there? I think they've adopted a new slogan that they're trying to deal with the middle class and those trying to stay in it, which is more and more difficult these days because of this bad budget. And the minister clearly didn't want to come to actually defend the actual spending plan. It's like your checkbook. Where did you write your checks? The estimates say, here's where we're going to actually write the checks in micro detail by department. Every minister usually gets called before their respective committee to defend estimates A, B, and C a few times a year. But incredibly, and unbelievably, and against what open and accountable government of 2015 says by this government, produced in the sunny ways days of this government on page 2, which says ministers are accountable to Parliament for the exercise of their powers, duties, and functions vested in them by statute. Ministers must be present in Parliament to respond to questions on the discharge of their responsibilities, including the manner in which public monies are spent, as well as to account for their use. So the budget is the plan of how they want to spend it. The estimates are how they account for the use. And so those are things that this government and this prime minister said that all ministers had to do. And in fact, if you read the mandate letters of each minister, including this minister, on page 2 of that mandate letter, it actually refers to this document because the world all ties together, I guess. And it says, open and accountable government sets out the core principles and standards of conduct which are expected of you and your office. So if the minister didn't read this document, I hope the minister read the letter from the Prime Minister to her, dated December 16th, 2021, setting out what her mandate is for as Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. And it says you have to live by these rules. And these rules say you got to show up to work. You can't be truant. And you can't blow off an invitation to talk about inflation and be a credible finance minister. You can't blow off an invitation by this committee to come here and defend your estimates, one of the most fundamental parts of every minister's job, and be a credible minister of finance. And you can't blow off the April 20th invitation in relation to the pre-study of this budget bill. But yet the minister blew off all those invitations in her 6 appearances. The calendar flipped to May, so we've had the monthly appearance this week of the minister in QP. I'll correct some of my earlier statements. When I made them, she had been in the House 5 times. Now it's 6. We were living in much hope that the Finding Freeland exercise was over, but apparently the Finding Freeland exercise continues. Now, we respect that the minister has a busy schedule. We all have busy schedules of members of Parliament, and certainly I would think anyone with the important position of Deputy Prime Minister has that. And we know that the minister has had a lot of time for travel because of only a few weeks ago the minister was in Washington. Perhaps she flew commercial, perhaps she flew on a government jet. We don't know. Maybe we should ask. but we can't because she's not here. And when she flew to Washington, she was commenting in a big public policy forum and a panel. She likes to go on panels. She did 2 this past weekend in Ottawa, but apparently the 10-minute walk from the Hill to the Shar Centre was too much to ask. And I know she doesn't have to walk because she does have a taxpayer-paid car and driver. She could have driven here and spared us a few minutes to talk about the budget, but her time was allocated to how to win elections by Hillary Clinton on a panel. And so she has that busy schedule, but the minister hasn't been here. And the minister has only made herself available to answer QP just 11% of the sitting days. So perhaps her pay should match that. But no, I think she's receiving a full paycheck of almost $300,000 a year, plus expenses, but showing up to work 11% of the time. And as Mr. Blakey often reminds me, Jack Layton once said to Michael Ignatieff, Canadians pay you to show up at work, maybe you should. So just to reiterate, because I know sometimes it's hard to count for some people in Parliament, so I'll make it easy, but the number of appearances in question period, I can give you the dates. You only need one hand. January 30th, February 13th, this year, by the way, March 10th, April 25th, May 1st, and this past Monday. I suspect the minister was here this past Monday because she couldn't get a flight out of town yet because of all the Liberals leaving town from their convention. So she had to stay an extra day. Otherwise, I'm sure she would have been somewhere else, and she wouldn't have graced us with her presence then, but she did. She did, but still, yet, in the Finding Freeland exercise for this flawed and failed budget, she is unable to attend this committee. I don't know, maybe somebody in the government side could let us know perhaps where the minister is today, because we'd be more than willing to have her come today. I'm sure she doesn't need to spend weeks preparing with her deputy minister. I'm sure she understands every aspect of the 51 bills, acts of parliament that she's proposing. I know she has an in-depth knowledge of the changes to the Ocean Protection Act, which this budget bill changes. I know she has an in-depth knowledge of the new bureaucracy being proposed for the employment insurance proposal. I'm sure she will be more than willing to explain why a snowflake should be on the crown of the Prime Minister. And so I would ask that the minister come, if she's in town, to do this. So I would then go on to just say I will come back later to this issue of the Treasury Board document that I know everyone was on their edge of the seat to hear the continuation of that today. And I can understand why the minister may not want to be here, because she did promise this restraint, that her economic policies are driving up inflation, are driving up groceries. We understand that there are now 1.5 million Canadians needing to use food banks. That's a record. I know people want to get a world record when they're in the Olympics. I'm not sure this is a record that one would want to seek, to have record levels of food bank usage. That she owes it to the 20% of Canadian families, I believe, who are skipping meals because of this high cost of food, to come here and help us understand how this pouring gas on the inflation fire will actually lower food costs so they don't have to make those choices. I believe she owes it to 9 out of 10 young people who believe they will never own a house because of the housing crisis that we have. So I think it's time for the minister to stop hiding. I think it's time for the minister to come here and defend her failed budget. And I think it's time for Canadians perhaps to go on social media, use the hashtag Finding Freeland, and take pictures so we can find out where exactly she is. And I will stop there for now. And if you can put me on the bottom of the speaking list, I would appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, MP Perkins, MP Lawrence, then MP Baker, MP Blakey, and then MP Chambers, and Perkins again.
I'd like to, if it's agreeable to the chair, give my slot to Mr. Chambers.
No, it will go next to MP Baker. MP Baker,
Can you hear me, Chair?
I can hear you.
Great. Mr. Chair, I've been waiting to move an amendment to the motion over the course of the filibuster, but given I haven't had the opportunity yet, and it's relevant to the discussion occurring right now, I wanted to advise members of the committee that I intend to move the following amendment when we've had a vote on Mr. Blakey's amendment. And here's what I would move. I would move that the motion be amended by adding after section B2.3, if the committee has not completed the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill by 4:30 p.m. on Friday, May 26, 2023, all remaining amendments submitted to the committee shall be deemed moved. The chair shall put the question forthwith and successively, without further debate on all remaining clauses and proposed amendments, as well as each and every question necessary to dispose of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill, as well as all questions necessary to report the bill to the House and to order the chair to report the bill to the House as soon as possible. So I wanted to give advance notice of this amendment so members can understand.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I believe we're debating a sub-amendment. It's not appropriate or allowable for a member to move another amendment while doing so. So I'm not sure that's relevant to this sub-amendment.
You said move. You said you were giving.
Well, as he's saying, I'm trying to provide notice for an amendment.
Yeah.
On that point of order.
It is
on that point of order, Chair.
And it is relevant. And MP Chambers, you've done it yourself. Others have done it here in the room. So, okay, MP Baker, you have the floor still.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm just giving. I'm making sure that members are aware of the intention here. So I'm giving notice. I'm not moving. So I wanted to give advance notice, so just so members can understand our intent going forward in this debate. Look, I believe the current filibuster which has seen us lose 20 hours of committee time that could have been spent hearing from witnesses, is indicative of the need to set a deadline for clause by clause to be completed. And this amendment mirrors language from the motion that we adopted during last year's BIA following a conservative filibuster last year. And I believe that we need this deadline because without such a deadline, we're likely to see another filibuster during our clause by clause review of the bill, which would result in a delay to the supports that are in the Budget Implementation Act, things like dental care, or other measures that are going to help, affordability measures that are going to help Canadians. We would see a delay in these supports being delivered, and it would impact, of course, the rest of the committee schedule. So I'd be curious to see where members stand on this amendment in the context of our current discussion about the sub-amendment and clause by clause. And I look forward to moving it when the Conservatives are prepared to allow a vote on the invitation for the Deputy Prime Minister to appear for 2 hours, which is an amendment that we support. So, I have provided the text of the motion that I given notice about to the clerk in both official languages as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You've sent it out. Okay. Thank you, MP Baker, and I believe the clerk has received it and distributed it. So next on my list, I have MP
Just to be clear, Mr. Point of order. Sorry, just to be clear, that closure motion is not in order at this point because we're discussing a
it is relevant, and the member is just giving notice.
You can't bring a motion, Mr. Chair.
No, the member is just giving notice of it, and it is relevant.
You can get notice.
Yeah. So,
but he wouldn't have to give notice anyways because we're discussing it.
Okay.
On that point of order, Chair. On that point of order.
Yeah, on the point of order, MP Baker.
Because the Conservatives continue to raise points of order. They've spoken for basically all of 20 hours minus a few minutes that our members have been able to speak, and for most of that 20 hours, they've spoken about nothing to do with the motion that's being debated, and so now I've raised a point that is relevant. I've not moved it. What I'm doing is procedurally correct. I'm simply giving an indication in the context of our current debate, in the context of about the amendment and the sub-amendment. That this is our intention, and I want them to know what I plan to move when they do allow us to go for the vote and end this filibuster, so that we can get the BIA passed and get Canadians the supports that they need that are available in the budget, but won't be available if we don't get the BIA passed soon. And that won't get passed soon if the Conservatives continue their filibuster.
Baker, I am going to suspend for a little bit just to confer with the clerk. Yeah. Yeah, it is relevant, and the notice is relevant, and so MP Baker can do that, and it has been distributed by the clerk, and all members should have received it in both official languages, I hope. And so we were last off with MP Baker, and then MP Baker. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I had everything that I've said everything that I wanted to say. Thank you.
And now we'll go back to our list. I've got MP Blakey, then Chambers, then Perkins. MP Blakey?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I trust I'm coming through on the microphone now. I just thought, I've been listening, obviously, for some time to the proceedings of the committee and learned a number of things about the East Coast fishery, and which is nice for a prairie boy, certainly not my area of expertise, but I understand actually that in the Second World War that prairie boys were more likely to sign up for the Navy than anyone else in the country, and I think there is a certain fascination that one has with things that are so different than what you know coming from the prairies. So I've been happy to, and in fact my grandfather did exactly that. He grew up in Bigger, Saskatchewan, and joined the Navy. The Canadian Naval Air Group was his beat, and so I've been happy to kind of indulge similar sentiments during the course of Mr. Perkins' remarks, let's say. How's that for diplomacy? I think pretty good, Mr. Chair.
I would have to agree.
But I think at this point want to take a moment to express some frustration. I mean, I had hoped that we would get to a point where we could find a way forward as a committee, because for as much as I've been enjoying some of Mr. Perkins' remarks, I would like to hear from Canadians about the content of the budget bill. I know, for instance, that many people have been frustrated at airports, and that there's a proposal in this bill to fix up the Air Passenger Bill of Rights. It's frankly one that I'm not, that I don't think is adequate, and I've been doing some good work with my colleague Taylor Backrack, who's the NDP transport critic, that has a lot to say, and rightly, about the government's proposal on the Air Passenger Bill of Rights. I'm looking forward to Taylor suggesting some amendments to the bill. I would prefer that we get to hear from folks that are experiencing these challenges in airports. I'd prefer to hear from folks in the industry about how we can improve that. And, we're not able to do that if we don't find a way to resolve the filibuster. I share Conservatives' frustration in the minister not agreeing to come for 2 hours. I think that would be helpful. I understand why my colleagues across the way are frustrated with the way that this has gone down and the Conservative choice to filibuster. So I'm just, I'm would really like for us to find a way past this. There's other, we've all talked about the excise tax around this table, and while we didn't get a freeze on the excise tax, the Budget Implementation Act does lower the excise tax increase to be consistent with the inflation target rather than actual inflation, which in the current context is a good thing. And I think will definitely be a benefit to, local breweries and vineyards who've been concerned about the outsized excise tax increase that they will otherwise face if this committee can't find its way to doing the work that has properly been assigned to it. I think of some of the information sharing provisions that are important to the implementation of the dental care plan. I know conservative colleagues, have rightly pointed out that, the attestation method of delivering program does have a lot of pitfalls. I think it's important that we move past that. Some of the legislative proposals in this bill are meant to move the dental care plan out of an attestation and payment model into a permanent program model where Canadians are able to go to the dentist, get basic dental services, and have those directly paid instead of sending a check and having them have to pay it themselves. I think we're moving towards a better model. It's the model that I want to see. It's a model I'd like to see applied universally to Canadians. And I don't expect everyone around the table to agree with that, but I do think that if this is a democratic forum, we should be able to get to the point where we get to make decisions about that as people who were duly elected to represent our constituents and to make those decisions around the table. But we haven't been able to do that because we haven't been able to get to a vote on anything. I think of some of the anti-money laundering provisions in the bill. I think of the increase in the tool deduction for tradespeople, which as an electrician is something I can definitely appreciate, people would value. But these are all things that, that we need to be able to get on to the study of the bill and to have the bill pass in order for Canadians to get the benefit of it. I think also of some of the provisions in here that will remove tax from veterans' benefits, something that, again, while I can appreciate my conservative colleagues might not be crazy about the whole package, that's something that I think is a good thing and that we should be moving forward with. And so the question isn't like, how do we get to the point where everybody around this table agrees with everything in the bill? I don't think we are going to get there. We don't have to get there. As conservatives like to remind us when we talk about the electoral system and our parliament, we live in a majority decision-making context. That's what the House of Commons is. You need a simple majority to decide virtually every question. But we have to be able to put the question in order to make those decisions. And at a certain point, having a minority of people on the committee hold up the possibility of making a decision at all simply because they don't like the decision that's going to be made or because they want this thing or they want that thing becomes a problem for the whole artifice of Parliament. So, I respect the right of members to filibuster. I usually, I certainly respect it more when there's an obvious point to the filibuster, where the body that's being filibustered has the power to grant what is wanted. But this committee doesn't have the power to compel the minister to appear for 2 hours. It simply doesn't have that power, never has had that power. And unless we substantially change some of the basic principles of the Westminster parliamentary system, we will not have that power. I think we shouldn't be in a position of having to contemplate that because I think the minister should just come for 2 hours for Pete's sake. We're there, but we can't do that around this table. What we can do is invite Canadians from civil society in to talk about their concerns about the bill, both what they are concerned about in the negative sense of wanting to see change, but also their concerns from a positive sense in the way that the bill addresses some of those concerns. But we can't do that if we're going to sit here day in and day out. Like originally, the motion that we're amending and then sub-amending talked about a goal of 20 hours of study. Well, we've spent the 20 hours. We could have spent that 20 hours with real people talking about their real concerns about what's in the bill or not in the bill. And instead, we've spent that 20 hours listening to a handful of the same people talk about a small subset of issues. So, I say this with all due respect to my colleagues. I'm frustrated. I'm not angry. I support the right of parliamentarians to engage in this kind of activity, but I would ask that there be a more obvious point to it, and that when they want something and they're going to filibuster on it, that they do it for something the committee can actually deliver, rather than something that we can't compel because then we could deal around this table and we could get it done and we could move on. But as long as the filibuster is going to be about something that is outside the power of this committee to compel, we're stuck. We're stuck. And so I find that frustrating. I much rather would have spent this time listening to others about the bill proper. And I just think we're at the point where we are running out of time. Some of these things that I mentioned earlier need to be in place. Dental care is a priority for the NDP, and it's a priority for me. And I want to get done what we need to do in order to be able to institute that program on a better basis than the attestation basis. I am concerned to do that. I will do what's within my power to get that job done, among some of the other things that are in this bill that I think are important. But we should do it with time to have a process. We can't, everyone around this table knows the most valuable commodity on Parliament Hill is time. It's not, money is important. There are many things that are important, but the real currency on Parliament Hill is time. And we're pissing it away right now. If we want to value the study of this bill, we do that with time. And if we want to get this bill passed by the summer in order for some of these things that need to be in place in order to move ahead, like a reduction in the amount that the excise tax will go up by, then we only have so much time between now and when the House rises. We are making a choice right now. I would say our Conservative colleagues are making a choice for us as to how that time gets spent. And I don't think they're making a good choice. So I'm happy to be a part of conversations, have been part of conversations to try and break the impasse. We'll continue to show up in good faith to conversations to try and break the impasse. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot that I can do unless others are willing to play ball. So I certainly hope that we can find a way to break the impasse, because I want to hear from Canadians on the bill, the good parts and the bad parts, and I want to ensure that the shenanigans at this table don't prevent some of the concrete benefits of certain things in this bill from proceeding. And I think we're up against the clock in that respect. So I really beseech my colleagues to find a way to move forward instead of leaving us stuck in this position for another, 20 hours or whatever it's about. It's been about 20 hours now, give or take, right? Let's not do another 20. That's the time we have to talk to Canadians about the bill. Let's use it, please.
Okay. Thank you, MP Blakey. And I have on the speakers list MP Chambers, then MP Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I always find the interventions from my NDP colleague to be fairly persuasive on a number of matters. Him and I share a similar frustration. I would be much rather listening to witness testimony. I apologize to Mr. Baker. I believed he was trying to move the amendment, but I now realize it was just a notice, which I think is in order, so apologies for the point of order. But I'll, Mr. Chair, provide notice of a sub-amendment to Mr. Baker's proposed amendment, which is May 26th, moved to June 8th. So when we get there, that sub-amendment will be made to Mr. Baker's amendment. I will also give notice of another amendment that I would seek to move once we get out of this rabbit hole of sub-amendments and amendments, which is to have the chair draft a letter to the Prime Minister's office that asks that the Deputy Prime Minister be freed up to appear for 2 hours. Now, Mr. Chair, we've entered something of the twilight zone. We are now at a point where the government would love to see the filibuster continue. And let me explain. The answer that the minister has not confirmed for how long she might be available is a little cute by half on behalf of the government. If the minister was available for 2 hours, I think she would say she's available for 2 hours. But to suggest that the minister is unaware that she's being requested for 2 hours because she hasn't been formally invited, I think is quite disingenuous. As I mentioned in my intervention last meeting, which I think sent shockwaves through buildings of downtown Ottawa, in particular the once former Langevin Block and the Prime Minister's office. There are multiple ways for which this impasse can be resolved. And one of the simplest and easiest ways is a confirmation from the finance minister that indeed she is available for the 2 hours. And so I don't think there needs to be a motion from the committee to change the invite. But perhaps I just simply ask the chair, have we asked for how long the minister is available, or we've just sent the invite, right? So I think we could pretty quickly solve it instead of trying to hide behind, oh, we haven't actually formally requested the 2 hours. I think everybody knows the game. And now I think the Liberals would be just happy to see us filibuster through next Tuesday, because now they don't even need to be held accountable for their own budget. And May 26th is quite an aggressive timeline under which you'd like to conclude clause by clause. Last year we were short of witness testimony. This year we'll likely be short of witness testimony. But again, the minister has been, we talk about majority rule or majority will. The minister has been invited for 480 minutes to this committee over the last year and is intending to appear for 60 minutes next week. So in a weird way, I think the government's actually quite happy to let this continue, because they'll try to get a news article that we're prevented the minister from coming, she's ready to come, yet they could easily just solve this whole thing by saying, yes, it's going to be 60 minutes, it's great, we'll see you next Tuesday, Bob's your uncle, we all go home, and we make it. I'm wearing my flying pig socks. I know the parliamentary secretary is wearing his flying pig socks. I had high hopes for today. That's the tradition. Well, Mr. Blakey's going to leave when we suspend. Mr. Blakey will leave when we suspend and go put on his socks, and I think we'll have a resolution. But there is multiple paths to one outcome, and it seems relatively reasonable to at least confirm with the minister for how long she might be available. So I'm going to ask I'll like to ask the chair, has the question been asked to the minister for how long she's available?
So the committee asked that an invitation be sent out to the minister. The minister did respond and said that the minister was available. This was on behalf of the committee, yourself included there, MP Chambers, that the minister was available to come before committee on the 16th, next Tuesday.
Excellent. Follow-up question. Can we ask for how long? That doesn't require a motion. It doesn't require an invitation. That is a follow-up question. In order for us to be prepared, how can the chair and the clerk prepare if we don't know for how long the minister is available? Thank you.
We're back, and so looking, you know, I was talking to the clerk, and you know, he has great knowledge. Our clerk, thank you, Alexandre. Yes, yeah, and Sasha, thank you very much for all the help. You can do a great job, and yeah, I guess you know we can ask the committee at the will of the committee. You know, it's you know the committee can always ask.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And you know, and it's not to be too pedantic, but if we think about preparing for next Tuesday, we might either have 2 hours of the committee with the minister if there's available, or an hour with the minister and potentially an hour with witnesses. So we actually have to know if we need to schedule witnesses or invite witnesses for Tuesday. So I think it would be important to clarify with the minister for how long
Just a quick,
she's
just a quick
available.
point of order, if you don't
Point of
mind.
order?
Would it be useful for us to clarify that we think that question should be submitted electronically and not by carrier pigeon to Japan? I would just think if we clear up some of the details at the outset, we might.
That's up to the committee, MP Blakey. Yeah. So MP Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to just briefly, in response to Mr. Baker's intervention about delaying potential supports for Canadians, the GST rebate, which has been marketed as the grocery rebate, thanks to the NDP, as I'm sure I hear somewhere in the back of the room, that's actually not going out until July. For the sole reason, because of the government's incapability of executing it properly. They even split off a separate bill to pass what we're calling the grocery rebate, the HST rebate. But those checks actually, and that relief's not going out until early July. That's not because this committee is delayed. That's actually because the government's execution capabilities were such that even when we all agreed to pass it quickly, we couldn't get it out. So there is no relief, not one penny of relief, that's going to be delayed because of what's happening here. And by the way, with Mr. Baker's amendment, this bill is going to be out of committee on May 26th anyway. So there is no relief from this budget that's going to be delayed or lost by Canadians because we've lost a few hours of committee testimony. I mean, they're programming it to be out by May 26th in any event. So I just have to take a slight issue. It's in fact the government's own execution capabilities that have delayed relief getting to Canadians. In fact, all parties got together and supported and fast-tracked the bill that separated out the GST rebate. And we supported it. We supported it a couple months ago. The Conservatives did, and as well in the fall when it came out. And we did so on the understanding that it would more expeditiously get help to Canadians, but those checks will not be going out until July. So in summary, Mr. Chair, I think it would be great if we get the confirmation, which I believe that is underway. I think that will help us advance this impasse once we get an answer back from the minister's office. Because I think we're being a little cute when we say, yes, we can come, the minister can come, but we're not sure for how long. So if we can confirm that, that'd be great. But I'll just point out that this is feeling a little like the Twilight Zone, because when the government provides answers like that, you have to ask yourself, maybe they want the filibuster to continue. They don't want to be accountable. We're actually pulling resources from other committees, which gets the government off the hook from talking about some difficult and uncomfortable situations in other committees. So we, at least on this side of the table, think that there is a path to solution without actually being too intrusive. I'd love to see witness testimony. I was very frustrated last year with the lack of witness testimony, and people actually the only opportunity is for them to go to the Senate. Which is a fine institution, no doubt. but I think members around this table have some very intelligent questions to ask of witnesses when they show up. I would like to get to that point, but I really do not hope that the government is now hoping that the filibuster continue and that they will answer the question about how long the minister is available forthwith so that we may proceed. So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate your indulgence. I apologize earlier for interrupting on the point of order with Mr. Baker, which I understand was an appropriate notice of motion. I didn't think it was appropriate to move it at that point or motivate it, but I hope that we can proceed in a fashion, and we'll get an answer back from the clerk. And I'm sure the clerk, when he receives an answer, will interrupt us right away and let us know. And I thank the clerk, both clerks, for their work, as well as the interpreters. I don't think anybody's really given too much accolades to our interpreters, but thank you for being with us. I see a thumbs up. We appreciate all of the work you do. Mr. Chair, I'll yield the floor.
MP Chambers, MP Perkins.
Did I hear, oh no? I thought I was gaining fans. I'm sorry. I'm sensitive that way. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am recalling, though, some discussion on Tuesday night about the question of whether the Minister of Finance's bill is or is not an omnibus bill. And maybe this is a question we could pose as an important question to the minister if the Minister of Finance comes for 2 hours. And there was some claim that there wasn't. I obviously believe that a finance bill is about raising money and expending money for the government and borrowing money. And things outside of that are actually bills related to other matters. And that's why we call them omnibus bills. And I know that all the members on the government side love this document, a new plan for a strong middle class, the 2015 platform that they ran on. And I'll read from page 30 of what it says. Now, it does mention one of the best prime ministers Canada's ever had, and Stephen Harper. And it says, though, that Stephen Harper has also used omnibus bills to prevent Parliament from properly reviewing and debating his proposals. That was the perspective of the Liberal Party then, that was a prevention of Parliament properly debating proposals. And I know most Canadians will be shocked to learn that the Liberal government said we will change the House of Commons standing orders to bring an end to this undemocratic process. So that's probably why some of the government members objected to me calling this an omnibus bill. But as I pointed out, there are amendments to the Canada Elections Act in this bill. The Canada Elections Act is not a question of spending, borrowing, or raising money, but apparently that is not considered an omnibus element under the promise of the Liberals in 2015 to end that practice. So I can understand maybe that's what's making the minister feel uncomfortable in coming. Perhaps I'm being generous because I actually think it's the content of the bill, not so much in the sense of the inability or the ability of her to actually defend why in Parliament, where truthfulness is everything, why her document and why her economic statement said we would have a balanced budget only 6 months ago, said that the Parliament, tabled the document in Parliament, made it available to Canadians, yet at the end of the day, only 6 months later, she or somebody within the government told her that's no longer our plan. We're going to go back to our plan that we've been following since we got into office. Not the one we promised in 2015, where we would only run small budgets, deficits, and that we would balance the budget in 2019. No, that's what was promised, but the minister probably doesn't like being reminded of that because either she or the collectivity of the cabinet or perhaps the Prime Minister's office didn't free Freeland to live up to that promise, or Bill No More, the previous guy, when they now say, well, we're going to balance it again. So they went back to their 2015 promise in 2022 and said, okay, well, what we've been saying in the last 6 years or 7 years, well, where we weren't going to balance a budget, we've now been convinced we're going to balance a budget. And now the budget that gets presented to Parliament proposes no balancing of the budget. And these are questions that need to be asked on behalf of Canadians. And it's not as if there is a revenue problem, because there's 63% more revenue coming in today to the government of Canada than there was when this government was elected in 2015. And if you believe this plan, remembering that none of these budget plans have ever been met that the Liberals have put in, much like their climate change plan, none of these budgets have ever been met. If you believe this plan, by the end of the 5-year fiscal framework, government revenue will have gone up 92%. Now, I know I've told a few stories in the last few hours before this committee to bring people back, but I know regardless of age, most people in this committee and most people watching will be familiar with a group called the Beatles. I presume most do, and I'm a fan. I've always been a fan. It's one of my favorite groups, and they had, if you recall, 71 Billboard top hits, 34 top 10s, and 20 number ones. And in that mix was a song called The Tax Man. And every time I hear it, I think of the current prime minister. And it goes like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me tell you how it will be. Now, I'm not doing justice to the way John Lennon sang it, although he did not write it. Let me tell you how it will be. And this was about the Labour government of the 1960s, was what this song was written about in Britain. Let me tell you how it would be. There's 1 for you, 19 for me being the government, because I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man. Should 5% appear too small, that's the 5% you get to keep that you earned. Should 5% be too small, be thankful that I don't take it all, because I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man. If you drive a car, I'll tax the street. If you try to sit, I'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, this one has a special resonance right now. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. Could have been a carbon tax. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. Well, we know that the carbon tax impacts the cost of shoes because it requires rubber, which requires oil and gas. And every stage of manufacturing a shoe will have a carbon tax, has a carbon tax applied, which is increasing inflation. So if you drive a car, I'll tax the street. If you try to sit, I'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. I think that's the platform of the Liberal Party. I'm the tax man because I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man. Don't ask me what I'm waiting for.
Point of order, MP Samari.
Oui, alors je remercie
Thank you, Honorable Parkings, for all of the information that you're sharing with us, but I'm afraid that you may have led the committee in error, saying that it's John Lennon who sang that hit of the Beatles, when I verified it was George Harrison who sang it. And it was the first time when they had asked him to sing a song, so please let's respect the 4 fabulous, especially the great guitarist George Harrison, who was capable of singing that song. Thank you.
For that
On the
clarification.
same
And I really appreciate
that.
But on that same point of order,
On the same point of order, I would say that I think Give Peace a Chance might actually be a Beatles song with a more practical implication for the committee. Perhaps we should consider that song instead of others in this moment we find ourselves in.
Hallelujah.
oui, Monsieur le Président, encore une fois.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, once again, so as not to lead the committee in errors, Peace at Chance is not a Beatles song, but a John Lennon song. So in his solo career, after the Beatles. I also want to clarify that we had wanted to record in a choir in Montreal during in the Ritz-Carlton, I think. So as an anecdote, okay, Queen Elizabeth, thank you. The original soundtrack was lost, so we had to do a re-recording somewhere else. So we need to have those details as accurately as possible. And on that note, thank you, Chair.
The summary, so MP Perkins, and I hope that helps.
I defer to the greatness of the bloc member, who's clearly even a bigger fan than I. And I'm sure he then, with his knowledge, will know that the Taxman, this famous song, was actually not written by Lennon or McCartney. It was written by Gary Harrison. Gary Harrison wrote this song, and it goes on to say, "Don't ask me what I want it for if you don't want to pay some more." Sort of a threat, because I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man. Now, my advice for
Isn't
those
that what you
who
guys say about this filibuster?
No,
Don't ask us what we want it for.
Got MP Zerowitz's hand up. Is that MP Zerowitz? Is that to get on the speaking order, or is it
Yes,
to get on the speaking order? Okay.
if I could ever speak.
It's MP Perkins.
I was hoping maybe MP Derowitz had some more insights for us on the Beatles, and that the song concludes, "My advice to those who die, declare the pennies on your eyes, because I'm the tax man, and you're working for no one but me." And I know that's the way Canadians feel when they read this bill or hear what the minister wants to do, because it's clear that the carbon tax is not only a tax on the car and the street, it's a tax on your seat, it's a tax on the heat, and it's a tax on your feet, as the Beatles said. It almost sounds Dr. Seussish, but and Dr. Seuss would probably be appalled by the impact of the cost of the carbon tax on the production of the pulp and paper for his books that are caused by this bill. So in the end, back to where MP Chambers said, this is not some sort of theoretical thing. It could all be solved by the minister agreeing, and I'm sure the PMO has told her, wherever she's traveling to, that the committee is asking for 2 hours. I'm sure they've informed her of that. There was some implication that she does not know until a motion is passed here. I believe the parliamentary secretary, Mr. Beach, I'm sure in his many conversations with the minister, will have informed her about what's going on in the committee and what it would take to solve this, to address the issues that Mr. Blakey so rightly raises, that we want to hear from Canadians. Now, it appears that the government doesn't want to hear from them, because we've been given notice of essentially a closure motion. A closure motion to try and keep Canadians from hearing about the budget, or to try and keep us from hearing from the minister. But I know it's noticed, so we'll deal with that when it comes. And I'm sure we may have a few things to say about a closure motion, and perhaps quoting the Liberals on their past practices and promises around closure. And if you'll recall, Mr. Chair, that the document that was very insightful, that I'm sure all ministers have read, this Treasury Board document called Meeting the Expectation of Canadians, Review and Responsibilities and Accountabilities of Ministers and Officials. Just for those who have not been watching or have just joined us, I won't start from the beginning, because there are 55 pages and I have about 30 or 40 left to read. But I will mention to you again, just as a reminder, that a great summary of what this required is, it says in here that Parliament is sovereign, and that ministers, that the House of Commons is the central feature of our Westminster system, and its efficacy depends heavily on the will and capacity of the House to hold ministers accountable. That's how our democracy works. And that's why some may find this process frustrating, but that's all we're trying to do. Even the Treasury Board of Canada says that's an essential, fundamental part of our democracy, is for Parliament to be able to hold ministers to account. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about having her appear before the committee 5 or 6 times, even though she's been invited. We're asking her, and not shown, we're asking her to give us one more hour. You know, brother, can you spare a dime was sort of the saying of the dirty 30s and the what happened in that global depression. Brother, can you spare a dime? Finance Minister, can you spare us an hour or 2, please? Just 2. 1 more hour is not a lot to ask for a $3.1 trillion spending package. In fact, I think it's modest. If I were putting forward the motion, and I might actually put forward an amendment at some time, sub-amendment, asking the minister to appear for as long as this discussion has gone on, so that we can get to the root of all of these budgets, and so that MP Blakey can pose all the questions that he wants to, because I'm sure in the 5-minute and 2.5-minute spot he'll get in a 1-hour thing, it would be totally inadequate for the NDP in asking the questions of the minister that they want to ask her, because that's all the NDP would be allocated in a 1-hour hearing with the minister on this budget. I don't think the dental plan and the pharma care plan that is part of the supply agreement with the Liberals could adequately be questioned, 1, whether one is adequate, and 2, why the other one isn't in the budget. It could be done in that short a time. That, by the way, for those of you who don't know parliamentary rules, that 5 minutes that MP Blakey will get and that 2.5 minutes on a subsequent round is not just his questions, it's the answers. So the NDP will get a total of about 7.5 minutes to question the minister on a $3.1 trillion spending bill and on why the things that they've put in their supply agreement with the Liberals have not been addressed to presumably to their satisfaction. Presuming that. So, but, and if we stay for 2 hours, if she grants us another hour, all that does is double the amount of time Mr. Blakey gets, roughly.
Not quite, because I don't get the first round.
You don't get the first round again, yeah. Yeah, so it just is 2.5-minute cycles. So now, if this chair, now I don't know, this chair is a very generous chair. The chair of the industry committee, Mr. Lightbound, he's very open to how the flow of questions goes. And that might be a way to look at the 2 hours and say, okay, I like the form of questioning here. Maybe if Mr. Blakey's questions are so insightful and the minister's answers are so penetrating and revealing, that you might let him go for 8 minutes in a session, as Mr. Lightbound does sometimes in that committee. But that's just presumably.
Speak out the first question.
Yeah, well, she could talk out the 5 minutes. That's the other option. If Mr. Blakey is excessively polite, which I know he is, he might ask one question and the minister could fill up the 5 minutes, unless he does as MP Erskine Smith does quite artfully and says quite frequently, and he did this brilliantly against the CEOs of the telecom companies, where he'd say, not my question. You're not answering my question. Please focus on my question. And at the end of course, after dealing for 2 hours with the CEOs, much like the experience we have with government ministers, I found it interesting that MP Erskine Smith condemned the 3 CEOs for not answering questions and going from talking points, something that apparently happens quite a bit that we see in the House. But you'll know that I'm not using any talking points here, but I am using some very important documents that are put out by the government to explain the minister's role in being accountable to Parliament. And on page 16 of the Treasury Board document that I shared, and that's to help the translators, folks, just so that they can follow along. And I am conscious of my pacing, because I know if you speak too fast, it makes it hard for the translators to follow. And I know that the members on the government don't want me to slow it down too much for the agony of perhaps prolonging it from their perspective. But I will take occasion, just in case I haven't articulated well, to spell some of the words here, particularly those words ministerial accountability and feel groovy. Slow down and feel groovy, another great quote from a Beatles song. So, and I think everyone's blessed that I didn't quote any songs from the Monkees. On page 16, we were talking about something called the main estimates, right? The main estimates and the minister's accountability for main estimates. And that contains the spending proposals. This Treasury Board document says, in the main estimates, the government presents to Parliament with spending proposal for fiscal year and provides the details on individual programs and on the plans and performance of departments and agencies. It indicates the areas in which it will spend funds and defines the limits to what the government may legally spend on a program without returning to Parliament to request more funds. That is critical to do. And we will recall that before, at the beginning of COVID, this government wanted to actually not have to go back to Parliament for 2 years and just have blanket authority to spend whatever they want, something that you find quite frequently in the supposed legislature dominated by the Communist Party of China in Beijing, which has done thoroughly through a supply bill or an appropriations act. If called, ministers must appear. If called, ministers must appear before a committee of the House of Commons to answer questions. It doesn't say may appear, maybe on their will, if they're not out traveling the world. I don't know why the Minister of Finance would be attending NATO meetings, but apparently she's been spending a lot of time there. It doesn't say will. This committee invited, very politely, the Minister to appear on estimates this year, and she ignored the Treasury Board guidelines for ministerial responsibility and did not come. It says right here in this Government of Canada Treasury Board guidelines that the minister will appear on estimates. The final sentence is even more direct. If you didn't get that sentence, the final sentence of this paragraph says, if called, ministers must appear before a House of Commons committee to answer questions on spending. Must. So why is it this minister doesn't feel that she must appear for 2 hours? 2 hours on this bill. It goes on to talk about several other committees and their roles, the Standing Committee on Government and Operations. And in the interest of brevity, I will skip that paragraph. Because actually I'll skip the next one too, because it talks about the Public Accounts Committee. And we're in the Finance Committee here, and I know everyone is impressed at my brevity.
And then public accounts is later on.
Oh, there is public accounts later today, so I'm being requested to actually hear just a little more for the usage of those who have dual committee responsibility, what the Treasury Board says the role of ministers is with the Public Accounts Committee. So it says in the final paragraph on page 16, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, otherwise more colloquial known as the Public Accounts Committee, scrutinizes all reports of the Auditor General and the Public Accounts of Canada once they are tabled in the House of Commons. And if viewers want to see what the agenda is for those committees, this committee or that, they can go to ourcommons.ca and click under parliamentary committees and pick out the committee that they're interested in and see the agenda. And if for some reason this committee is not being broadcast on CPAC, well, those who are watching this, if we're not being broadcast on CPAC, will know already, I guess, that you can go to parlview.ca, Parlvu.ca, and you can watch anything that's going on online in Parliament. You can just click on the committee. You can actually go back and view past things. You could go back and start to watch from the beginning if you want to. My presentation on ministerial accountability and these important government documents. In both official languages. I'm being pointed out because I do respect immensely my bloc colleagues making sure that we continue to make sure that people know that they can get any of these presentations, minutes, watch and viewing in both official languages. It's an easy button to click on the bottom. You just choose between English and French. And that's very important because we are an officially bilingual country. We only have one officially bilingual province, though, New Brunswick. But Canadians have a choice, have a right to ask for government services in the language of their choice. This final paragraph continues about the Public Accounts Committee, saying, the committee helps ensure the public funds are spent for the purposes authorized by Parliament. It doesn't say that the committee helps understand or oversee the money spent by the Minister of Finance on her own without anybody watching over her shoulder except for maybe the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. It doesn't say that here in this Treasury Board document. What it says is the committee helps ensure public funds are spent for the purposes authorized by Parliament. Only Parliament can authorize spending, right? This is part of this process. This massive omnibus bill, amending 51 acts. It's important that in getting to the understanding of that act and to ask the key questions, we need to ask them of the minister responsible. It's a fairly basic thing. It actually goes back to the basic establishment of the mother of all parliaments in Great Britain. And for those of you who don't know, the reason why the House of Commons is green is because the first House of Commons in Britain was held in a farmer's field, and it wasn't held in the winter, so the grass was green, and that's why that's our color, to represent the commoners, the farmers, the agriculture, the roots of our country, the common people, because the common people have common sense. And that's what we should be following to bring it home. Now, the committee, this Treasury Board report continues to say that the Public Accounts Committee does not assess the appropriateness of policies adopted by the government. That's actually for committees like this to examine the appropriateness of those issues. Public Accounts' job is to ensure that the money that was allocated to change the symbol on the King's crown from religious symbols to a snowflake, because apparently Canada is the only country with snow, has been spent correctly. That it hasn't been spent on enforcement of elvers. But Lord knows we need that, since the RCMP is refusing to enforce the law in Nova Scotia around illegal poaching. Maybe some of that money could be diverted there. But no, the Public Accounts would find that a misuse of public funds, because that is not what Parliament will be approving. If Parliament approves this bill, it will approve those specific changes. It's funny, though, I did not see in this bill, even though it deals with symbols around royalty, I was shocked to learn that the bill doesn't deal with the images on Canada's passport. That the government decided on its own that we should remove the image of Terry Fox and replace it with a squirrel eating a nut. Apparently, a squirrel eating a nut is more Canadian than Terry Fox. Wow. That would be an interesting question to pose to the minister. You know, maybe the minister is thinking that she's got to squirrel it away for a rainy day. I don't see any squirreling away for the rainy day in this budget, with $130 billion of debt projected to be added to our national debt, bringing it almost to $1.4 trillion, by the way, of which $1.1 trillion will have been added by the two Trudeaus, including those who don't know it. The current Prime Minister's father was also Prime Minister for a number of years and left our country in, I've been asked to know which years, because I know we have some young people in the room. And the young people, the specific years where he was first elected in 1968, defeated, which was a glorious day, defeated in, I think it was February 1979, February 23rd, if I'm to be correct. But I will defer to my Beatles expert who may know more specifically. But unfortunately, 9 months later, that government of the Right Honorable Joe Clark, oh, by the way, for those who don't know, after Pierre Trudeau was defeated, he resigned as leader, drove away in his rare Mercedes Gullwing car from Parliament Hill because he didn't have the limo anymore. That car, which the son now owns, is worth something around $30 or $40 million. The car is actually worth more than the $14 million apparently that the Prime Minister is worth. The car is actually worth more than his assets, but other assets. But it doesn't seem right, but he inherited a beautiful car. And Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau left town with his tail between his legs in a very, very expensive, collectible, and rare car. And in 1980, early 1980, a very colorful finance minister who went on later in the Mulroney government to serve as justice minister and trade minister by the name of John Crosbie, was Joe Clark's finance minister in 79, presented a budget accountable to Parliament. And that budget proposed the outrageous idea that in order to help pay off the debt and deficits that Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau had built up, the reason why he lost his finance minister, by the way, in 1975, John Turner resigned over that. The budget proposed an 18-cent a gallon, because we hadn't converted to metric yet, a gallon for 4.5 cents a liter. For those who don't know what a gallon is, a Canadian gallon, not a U.S. gallon, a Canadian gallon. 4.5 cents a liter, 18 cents a gallon tax on gasoline. Pikers compared to this government and the carbon tax, which is going to add shortly 41 cents a liter before the end of the decade to a gallon of gas. I know, unfortunately, we lost John Crosbie a couple of years ago, but John would blush at the thought of presenting a budget that imposes 41 cents a gallon tax, because the result of John Crosbie's 18-cent tax a gallon, 4.5 cents a liter, was that the Liberals and the NDP got together, I believe, with the the Union Nationale from Quebec, to defeat the Crosbie budget and send us to an election. Now, you would think at the time, since the Liberals didn't have a leader, that they wouldn't have done such a thing and would have respected the fact that somebody was trying to clean up the mess they had caused. But apparently not. And so the wily old Alan McEachen from Nova Scotia got Pierre Trudeau back into the saddle to fight the 1980 election, where he ran around calling himself the gunslinger. Can you imagine that? A Liberal leader, a Liberal Prime Minister calling himself the gunslinger. Really? Yeah, given what the Liberals are doing with Bill C-21, I find it hard to believe that they would be proud of the legacy of a Liberal Prime Minister who served ultimately from 1968 to 1979 and then from 1980 to 1984, that he called himself the gunslinger. He would actually stand with his fingers pointed like guns in his belt loop when he was campaigning, the gunslinger. Wow. So I guess he had a different view on firearms than the current government does. So if I could go on to the next sentence of the report, it's the last sentence on page 16.
But then he brought it into government and implemented the tax.
Well, I'm being reminded. We have many knowledgeable members of Parliament here who are very familiar with history. And MP Maguire, who has an extensive background in elected office, understands and remembers those times as well, and remembers that, not unlike his promises in 1974, Pierre Trudeau said he wouldn't impose wage and price controls, made fun of the Tory leader Robert Stanfield by saying, zap, you're frozen. Then when he got into government, unusually for a Liberal, flipped his position and brought in wage and price controls. He said he would not impose an 18-cent a gallon tax, 4.5 cents a liter tax on Canadians on gas, that this was outrageous when he was brought back without a leadership convention, by the way. They just put him in and appointed him. Really? Not very democratic. And what did he do? What did he do when he got reelected? and defeated the government of Joe Clark, he brought in the tax that he ran against.
Really?
He brought in the tax. I know it's unusual, and people will find it hard to believe that.
Did they do that again?
No, that they would believe.
Perkins, I think I mentioned before, just for the sake of the interpreters, for their health and safety, and for members, just the crosstalk that's coming across, it does affect them.
Right.
And we do hear that it doesn't allow them to do their job professionally, and affects them because they're not able to do the interpretation, and they're getting bad sound. So if we could just allow one speaker at a time, just yes, MP Samari on a point of order.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, for this important reminder. I just want to clarify something. The honorable colleague made reference. He wasn't sure of the name of the party. I think he wanted to talk about Crédit Social, and not Union Nationale, which was the party at the Quebec National Assembly. Thank you.
MP Perkins.
Merci beaucoup. Yet another insightful historical intervention, not on the Beatles, but on the correct name of the party that was in Parliament at the time, and I very much appreciate that. Nonetheless, the result of their joining in the vote to defeat the government resulted in Canadians actually having to pay the tax anyway, and a Liberal Party surprisingly promising one thing in election and doing another. That's the one thing I know that is dependable, what Canadians depend on, sort of like saying we're going to balance a budget or not, and then saying in 2022 we're going to balance a budget, and then saying 6 months later we're not. But the last sentence here says, well, there are many other things I could talk between 80 and 84. We could talk about the fact that between 1980 and 84, once Pierre Trudeau was back then we didn't have a goods and services tax in Canada. We had something called the manufacturer's sales tax. Now, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the manufacturer's sales tax, especially the young people in the room. But if you're not familiar with it, there was no tax on sales like you see now on your bill. Back then, what we had was a tax on only things that were manufactured. But it wasn't once the thing had been manufactured. It was a tax on every level of the process of manufacturing. And between 1980 and 84, that tax rose 7% to 14%. To 14% on all manufactured goods. So if you were manufacturing something and you bought a piece of wood to manufacture it, you paid a 14% tax on it. And then if you bought the saw to cut it, you paid a 14% tax on that. And then if you cut that into something that then got made and sold to another company, for that company to turn it into part of, say, furniture, it got taxed again. And all through the system, it got taxed 14%. 14%. But it wasn't visible. Nobody knew it existed except for Parliament and people in Parliament. And that government almost doubled the tax in that 4 years, a hidden tax. So yes, it's true. That tax continued to exist from 84 to 88 during the first term of the Mulroney government, although they signaled in an economic blueprint released in 1985 that said, we're going to restructure the economy. We're going to look at trade rules around the world. There was no free trade anywhere in the world. There was not even a WTO. There were some rounds of GATT, but there wasn't much going on in free trade. There were, I think it was 10 or 12 tax brackets back then. Had to look at that. There were issues around the inefficiency of the sales tax because we were moving from a manufacturing economy to a services economy. And that's why in the 1988 campaign, the Conservative government said, you know what, we're going to get rid of a 14% manufacturer's sales tax. That was the election of free trade, a unique concept in the world at the time. And we're going to get rid of the 14% manufacturer's sales tax, and we're going to cut that in half down to 7%, but make it fair across the whole economy so that manufacturing isn't unduly penalized versus services industry, because we have a competitive economy. So the tax actually got reduced. But the most important thing that was done, unlike the Liberal manufacturer sales tax, is the goods and services tax was made visible. And I, believe it or not, as a young fellow with a lot of hair, as a staffer, would sit in some of those cabinet meetings. As the way staff sit behind us here today, I would sit in some of those cabinet meetings where they discussed whether or not it should be made visible. And it was a big political debate because politically, why would you remind people every time they bought something that you had imposed this tax? That was the beauty from a political perspective of increasing the manufacturer sales tax. You could increase it and nobody knew. No consumer knew. It was just buried in the price. Really? But if you made it visible in the goods and services tax, then you would be accountable to the people who elected you if you decide to increase it or decrease it. So good public policy choice was made after extensive debate to say we're going to do the right thing. Because you know what? Even though perhaps the current government doesn't realize they won't be in power forever, we realize that unfortunately we wouldn't be in power forever, and we weren't. And so future governments, if they wanted to change the goods and services tax, it would have to be visible to Canadians. They'd have to be held accountable, like this committee tries to do, to Canadians for changing one of the most fundamental things of a democracy, taxation. Taxation, right? Whether the Crown did it before we had a Westminster system, or whether you had the American Revolution over taxation and the Boston Tea Party, taxation is a fundamental thing. We don't want taxation without representation, but you can't have representation if you don't know the tax exists. So the GST was made public and visible. And it was not a good thing for the Mulroney government in terms of its reputation with people, because all of a sudden people thought, what's this? Why are we getting a new tax? It wasn't a new tax, it was a replacement tax at half the other rate, but they thought they had a new tax. And the government paid the political price for that amongst other things, trying to bring Quebec into the constitutional family through the Meech Lake Accord and the Charlottetown Accord, also had an impact in the public. Doing big things, as the Prime Minister's mandate letter asks ministers to do the big things is what that was about, trying to make sure Quebec was part of our Canadian family, along with big things like doing the right thing and making sure future governments would be held accountable for any changes in the sales tax that we collect as a government, we're responsible for as a government. And you know what? It worked. It worked. Not only has it been a financial bonanza far beyond the thoughts of what our humble minds could envisage at the time when we brought it in terms of the amount of revenue, because as the economy grows, the revenue to the government grows because people spend more. But on top of that, guess what? Nobody's increased the tax. Nobody has increased the tax. So that visibility has kept at bay what was happening before. In fact, some may recall that one of the greatest prime ministers we ever had, Stephen Harper, actually reduced the tax by 2%, from 7 to 5%. But you know, what happened afterwards was puzzling, because this goes to the whole issue of accountability and visibility. But because for efficiency, many of the provinces over the years have managed to combine their provincial sales tax with the federal sales tax in something called the HST, or the harmonized sales tax. And the harmonized sales tax was for administrative efficiency. It also allowed provincial governments to expand the number of goods and services that their provincial sales taxes were on, because the GST was on a broader one, so it increased revenue. But you know what a number of provinces did? Because in most provinces, except for Alberta, in most provinces, the combined provincial federal sales tax between the GST and the provincial tax, when harmonized, was 15%, except in Alberta, where they have no provincial sales tax. So Alberta is the only province today that has seen the benefit in long term of Stephen Harper's reduction from 7 to 5% of the GST, because in my home province, when the NDP were in power, that's what happened. The one term and only term NDP government under Darrell Dexter, who I consider a friend, decided to take up the room and increase the provincial sales tax from 8% to 10%, keeping the HST at 15%. So nobody in Nova Scotia got to see the benefit of that reduction in tax. And I think if I'm stand corrected, a lot of other provinces thought that was a great idea because we could hide our tax increase and not get the blame for it. Again, it goes to the issue of this sub-amendment to the main amendment about accountability of ministers. If you don't know the tax is increasing, it's pretty hard to hold you to account. And that's why the final sentence of this page on page 60 says, it is concerned solely, that is the Public Accounts Committee, it is concerned solely with the economy and efficiency of government and administration. And it tables reports, that's the Public Accounts Committee, it tables reports and that are answerable to Parliament. In the same sense, oh, sorry, I went back to page 15 from 16. It's almost like I was a Liberal. I counted backwards. I'll go to the proper next page. I'll read that sentence again. It is concerned, the public accounts, solely with the economy and efficiency of government administration, and it tables reports on ways to improve managerial and financial practices and controls in departments. A member of the official opposition chairs the committee, and this is to MP Lawrence's question earlier, just to make sure that we understand the role of public accounts versus the role of the finance committee. Public accounts oversees and makes sure that where the government in its estimates says it will spend the money, that it only gets spent there. Unlike the habit of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to...
Mr. Chair, just a quick point of order here. So I'm reminded by my colleagues across the way to that we have to be relevant, and I would point the member perhaps to the $12 billion of unaccounted funds in the budget as a way of connecting to relevance here.
Lawrence, MP Perkins, your fellow colleague is telling you to be relevant.
On just a different.
Let's refocus. Let's refocus again. Just,
I'll just a point of order.
The Minister of Finance be invited to appear for 2 hours on the bill, and that this appearance be scheduled on or before May 18th, 2023. So, MP Perkins.
Just point of order before we continue, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, MP Chambers.
Thank you very much. I just wonder if the clerk has heard back from the minister's office yet. I believe.
I don't even know if there's...
No. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No new update. I was hoping, thank you, Mr. Chair, I was hoping that the Prime Minister's office was watching on parleview.ca and was monitoring this and saying,
2 hours.
MP Perkins is making great points. What have we done? We really need to tell the minister to come to the committee for 2 hours. The Pope. I'm being suggested that we should call the Pope. I'm not sure he's in the health to do that right now, but maybe the committee could travel to Rome, to the Vatican, to have questions. I'm sure that will be, I know we have a travel deadline request coming up for standing committees. Maybe it's something the government would like to propose. The practices of the House of Commons to pay for the translators, page 17. Sorry.
MP McGuire, yeah, welcome to the committee.
Just on a point of relevance there as well, my colleague just raised.
It's a point of order?
It's back to what my colleague was saying about the government, that they implemented the GST, and they said that they wouldn't do things that they ended up doing with the gas tax when they came in. It's the same relevance that happened to the Manitoba NDP when Premier Selinger, in an election campaign, said he wouldn't raise the PST in Manitoba.
What's the PST?
The provincial sales tax, yes. I'm corrected by my colleague there. These acronyms sometimes aren't always picked up by everyone, so I appreciate his intervention there. And of course, within months of forming government, they did. And it was 1%. It went back up, but there was even discussions of 2% at that time, but I guess they didn't figure they could push it that far, but they still lost the next election over it. So I remind my Liberal colleagues that there are good things that can happen when you don't pay attention to what happens to the finances of the country, which is relevant to the budget that we're speaking on here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, MP McGuire, MP Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, MP McGuire, for that clarification on the use of a province on the provincial sales tax. And I want to say that on page 17, we come to an interesting point in the report from, or the requirements on ministerial accountability from Treasury Board. And, I know it will come as a shock to committee members. I occasionally tell stories about the experiences I've had in the past and sitting around cabinet tables and that kind of thing as a staffer and some of the history we've gone over. But, and sometimes they joke that I sat in the cabinet of Sir John A., which I will clarify here for the public record, I did not. But I am going to make a reference here that really matters, that's in this document, and I wanted to make that clarification before somebody does a point of order on me, asking me if I was here in this presence of what this document says. And I will say what I'm about to read, I was not there. And it says, the practices of the House of Commons and the use of the standing committees has evolved. The practices and procedures in the House adopted in 1867, so I'm making that clarification, I was not there then. The practices and procedures that the House adopted in 1867 were a refinement of those in force in the United Provinces of Canada from 1840 to 1867. Now, it's important for this point, I think, that Treasury Board made, that they made a footnote on that point, on that, and it says in footnote 15 at the bottom of the page, see a brief history, and I know everyone will, but see a brief history of the evolution of the House of Commons in the McGraw Committee report. Now, most people would pronounce it McGrath, but it's not pronounced McGrath. It's McGraw, a good Newfoundlander MP who did an amazing report, and it's still relevant today if you haven't read it. Yeah, there was. His name, I think, was Blakey, was on it. Who contributed enormously to that seminal report on our parliamentary system that should be mandatory reading for all today. So, and in case you don't know about the McGraw report, this footnote notes that it's called the Report of the Special Committee on the Reform of the House of Commons. It's dated in Ottawa. It was by the Queen's printer, the Government of Canada printer, and it was printed in 1985. You may also want to see, and as I'm sure MP Bill Blakey, a fine gentleman who I did know, the father of MP Blakey sitting at this table here today, I'm sure this was a part of it as well. See also C.E.S. Franks. C.E.S. Franks did a report called The Parliament of Canada, and it was printed in Toronto by the University of Toronto Press 2 years later in 1987. And it says that if you do go and get that report from the Library of Parliament, and I recommend you do, that in particular you look at pages 238 to 256. Now, back to the paragraph on this issue of the United Provinces of Canada and how committees have evolved. Little changed in the standing orders. The standing orders, by the way, for those watching, are the rules of the House, the rules of how all of this works. Little changed in the standing orders or in the House detailed scrutiny of government expenditures until the mid-1950s. I'll also clarify, I wasn't born then either, so please do not accuse me of sitting in cabinet meetings in the 1950s. Rules adopted at that time addressed matters including the length of time for the budget debate. Really? Interesting point. In 1958, with the election of the Diefenbaker government,
were you there?
Diefenbaker government? I was not there. I have never even met John Diefenbaker, but I did know his executive assistant. And MP Maguire met John Diefenbaker, first elected prime minister in 1957 in a minority, but an overwhelming, smashing victory in 1958, winning many seats, only to be surpassed in the number of seats by Brian Mulroney's victory in 1984. So apparently in 1958, with the election of the Diefenbaker government, greater use was made of standing committees. I guess up till then, they weren't used as much. And for the first time, a member of the official opposition was chosen to chair the Public Accounts Committee. Imagine that. Imagine that. A conservative government of John Diefenbaker expanded the roles of committees and said, you know what? Examining the spending of government accounts by the Public Accounts Committee is not something that should be chaired by a government member, they actually, in government, said we should have an opposition member chair the Public Accounts Committee. Is that a dedication to ministerial accountability or what? That's a belief in our parliamentary system like we don't see these days. So again, I'll read it. For the first time under the Diefenbaker government, a member of the official opposition was chosen to chair the Public Accounts Committee. And the committee began to hold regular meetings. That's a good concept. In 1968, there were more significant reforms made to the House procedures, including the following. And remember then, I don't know what time of the year it was in 68 that happened. It could have been under Prime Minister Pearson, or it could have been under newly elected Prime Minister Trudeau, who was fresh-faced. Trudeau mania, if it was under him, with all the world before him to change the world and use government for good, with an unusual respect for Parliament, for the Liberals, that in 1968 they made a series of significant reforms to House procedures, including the following three key changes. The estimates were no longer considered by a committee of the whole of the House, but were sent to standing committees. That was a good reform. Gave those expert committees the ability to scrutinize the spending in the departments that the minister is responsible for, i.e. the fisheries minister in the fisheries committee or the industry minister in the industry committee. The second reform, significant reform according to Treasury Board, that was made in 1968, was that the opposition was given a total of 25 days in which it could choose a topic of a debate. Debates, those are colloquially called opposition days, where we get to actually propose a motion to the House, for the House to debate and move, and for the general part in this government, for the government to ignore the vote, or in some cases vote against it, as they did recently on several opposition days. But we were thankful that they voted to send the China interference that the government's been aware of for 2 years. That was voted on, I believe, yesterday, that it would go to the Procedures and House Committee. So thanks to the some of these reforms, those things can happen. And the third thing is that most bills were referred to standing committees. Now, I was talking with MP Blakey the other day about bills going to standing committees. And talking about the time, again, I'm going to give a story. The time, there is a standing order, it's still on the books today, little used, that actually committees could be freed up from the arduous work of dealing with legislation, which can throw off the important subject studies that standing committees do. So, for example, we now have 3 government bills before the Industry Committee, which has halted right in the middle the important study that we were doing on a block motion to have the electronics and recycling ecosystem studied by the Industry Committee to understand all types of things. That's been stopped because we now have 3 bills, Bill C-27 on privacy, Bill C-34 changes to the Investment Canada Act, which I'm sure all members here are very interested in, and Bill C-42, a bill to create finally a beneficial corporate ownership registry. So there is a standing order that still exists today that says you can refer bills to legislative committees. These are special committees that get set up for each bill, exists for a bill, and then disappears. During the days where I was a young legislative assistant to a minister, that's where all bills went. They didn't go to standing committees, except for the budget. They didn't go to standing committees. They went to specially constituted legislative committees that would be set up to deal with, for example, Bill C-21, the change to the Firearms Act. It wouldn't go to security, SECU as we call it. It would go to a special committee of MPs set up from all parties, and it would have its own budgets and its own clerks and its own travel budgets. And then when the bill was reported back to the House with or without amendments, that legislative committee would disappear. So, for example, Mr. Chair, if you look at the biography of a former chair of this committee, who I knew well, Don Blankern, an irascible fellow from Mississauga who was elected and chaired this committee, I believe, for 6 years during the Mulroney government, and wasn't always a person who followed the government rules, I can tell you, much to the chagrin of Finance Minister Michael Wilson then. When you look up his bio, you will see legislative committee after legislative committee after legislative committee by bill listed, because when a finance bill came out of second reading in the House, the legislative committee would set up and Don Blanken would always be one who wanted to be on those bills to examine it. So while this reform in 1968 referred it to standing committees, I know personally that there were further reforms to the standing orders to allow for more flexibility. I think it's something we should use a little more today, those legislative committees. But like I've said before, I've gone a little off topic from this, but I still think it's about how we hold ministers to account in Parliament. There are different ways to do it under the standing orders, and some are effective. But the key part of it is whether it's a standing committee, a legislative committee, or whether it's public accounts or the finance committee, or two of my favorites, industry and fisheries, ministers come because it's a courtesy on both sides. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a courtesy on both sides. It's a courtesy to ask the minister to come and explain why this is such a great legislative initiative, but it's also generally polite, like when you get a dinner invitation to somebody's house, to go. I don't say to you, Mr. Chair, when I expect I'm going to get an invitation to dinner with you sometime, that when you do it, I'm not going to say, well, I can only go for a half hour. I know you want to talk to me about the insights I've provided the committee here on ministerial accountability for more than that over dinner and maybe a few glasses of wine. I don't say, I might bring eels with me. We could go for sushi. Legal. That's true. MP MacDonald reminds me, being a fellow Atlantic Canadian, that legal fishery is critical, and I will only consume fish legally caught, and shellfish as well, as I'm sure you do, Mr. Chair, that is part of your respect for the law. The report goes on in page 17 to say, further reforms occurred in 1982. So maybe I was getting ahead of myself, but 1982 was that last government of Pierre Trudeau. 1982 happens to be the year that the Liberal government of the day brought in the National Energy Program. Now, the author of that just recently died, and there was a minute of silence for him in the House. I was actually surprised to see. I think it was gracious of the Western members to stand and out of respect for a former parliamentarian who had passed away in a moment of silence, who had been the Minister of National Energy in 1982 and implemented the National Energy Program, which essentially tried to nationalize our oil and gas in Western Canada and forever cut any chance of Liberals winning seats in the prairies in any significant way out of their prospects. It's still much remembered today, and I think it was the height of respect, accountability, and graciousness of our Western members to stand in respect for a former parliamentarian, even though his primary claim to achievement in Parliament was a socialist program to nationalize our oil and gas, which did result in the former premier, who was also not with us at that time, who quipped at one time, let those Eastern freeze. There's a little blank in there. I won't say the word out of respect for the institution. Let those freeze if they're going to do this. And while on the tour of the prairies at that time, where the government was also in 1982-83 trying to get rid of something called the crow rate. No, I'm not talking about bird watching. I'm talking about, then the rail company CN was a Crown corporation, and it was how they charged for freight and grain on the prairies. And the fee they were charged was by mile back then. We may have gone to metric by then when Prime Minister Trudeau brought in metric, but they charge as the crow flies, but not actually the miles or kilometers that the train traveled. That obviously was cheaper than paying for the kilometers. But of course, CN was a Crown corporation. And surprisingly, the money that they wanted, the government wanted more money from grain producers. And they brought in a bill to Parliament to try, on its own, not in an omnibus bill. It wasn't in an omnibus bill. They brought in a separate bill to get rid of the crow rate. It was pretty controversial, as we know, because at one point in the heated debate in the House, what we see in question period today is tame, but the opposition charged the chair in challenging, physically charged the chair and surrounded the speaker. It was so bad. And because the speaker had made a ruling that the opposition didn't agree with. Now, back then, the rules were different, as this paper is telling us, on accountability. And one of the ways the opposition could hold the government to account was to not show up to the vote, because it required both whips to be present for a vote to be held. And because this was such a contentious issue, and because the government, we didn't feel, the Conservative Party didn't feel, was being held to account properly on it, the opposition whip didn't show up for the vote, for her Majesty's loyal opposition, didn't show up for the vote. So the bells, we occasionally see them flashing in here, but as we know, they make a noise when you're not in a committee room. The bells rang for 18 days straight. 18 days straight. The House didn't sit because the official opposition whip would not show up until the government would compromise and bend on their desire to overcharge and change the way grain farmers were being treated in this country. It got so bad that, and I know the analysts and the clerks of the committee could appreciate this, it got so bad that those bells were ringing so long, and they were physical bells. They're not like the electronic bells we have now. They wore out. They were having to replace bells in center block when it was open in order to keep them running. They had to order new bells and replace them and hook them up to the wires so that the bells could keep ringing for 18 days. And after the 18 days, the government finally compromised a bit on that issue. And that's about accountability. The opposition has few ways to be accountable. Now, I haven't read ahead, so I don't know if this paper deals with it, so I apologize if it does, but the government changed the standing orders, by the way, after that, so that the whips don't have to be present for a vote to happen in the same way then. So these things tend to change the rules, as this government has done, by using still the COVID excuse to put in a bill with the costly coalition or the rules, temporary standing order rules, change that the government can extend the sitting into the evening to midnight anytime it wants without the consent of Parliament. But most incredibly, in it, the NDP actually agreed, and great parliamentarians like Stanley Knowles would be rolling over in the grave. Stanley Knowles, by the way, if you don't know him, was House Leader for the NDP for almost, I think it was MP Blakey, 30 years, was actually offered the Speaker's job by the Prime Minister I mentioned earlier, Mr. Diefenbaker, and he said, no, I don't want it. It was an appointed Speaker back then. I don't want the job. I want to remain House Leader. And out of respect for Stanley Knowles, when Pierre Trudeau left office in 1984, Pierre Trudeau made him an honorary clerk of the House, gave him a seat at the table, at the procedures table, and an office in the Hill. Nobody expected he would actually go because he was retiring, but he went every day, I can tell you. As a young legislative assistant, Stanley Knowles sat at the table of the House every day for question period. He was more accountable. He wasn't even elected anymore, and he was going to question period, but the finance minister isn't. So, Stanley Knowles had more respect as we search for Freeland. Our Finding Freeland exercise continues. I wish Stanley Knowles were here today to tell us what he would think about a Minister of Finance not being willing to appear before a committee for 2 hours and a Minister of Finance only being in question period for 6 hours to be held accountable. The other thing that Liberal motion did on the standing orders, and it allows them to actually operate those evening sittings without Liberal quorum, without government quorum. Like, it's a fundamental thing about any meeting. I mean, maybe some of our viewers go and volunteer. I hope they do, volunteer for organizations. And if you go to the board meetings in those organizations, you need a quorum to conduct the meeting. The House of Commons is no different. You should have a quorum to be able to conduct business. But they've temporarily suspended that democratic accountability element of the House of Commons till June, but I suspect they're going to try and make it a permanent thing, that they don't even have to show up. But then what would we expect? We can't get the Minister of Finance to come for 2 hours. Why wouldn't they amend the rules to ensure that the government doesn't actually have to show up when it forces it to sit at midnight? But why bother showing up? But we'll just make everyone else sit while we go watch the Leafs win this round of the playoffs, which will happen. I am confident that the Leafs will win this round and make it to the next round. And I know the chair of the committee agrees with me, at least on our love of Canadian teams making it to the next round of the NHL playoffs. Edmonton also looks like it's on its way to the next round. I bet Edmonton will be in the final. Further reforms, this paragraph says, further reforms occurred in 1982, including the establishment of an annual parliamentary calendar, and which you can find online, by the way, and numerous measures to improve the use of House time. In 1985, the McGraw Report, of which MP Blakey's father was part of, the McGraw Committee noted that many parliamentarians were straining under the new workload placed upon them under this new committee system. The Mulroney government, one of our best prime ministers, in my personal view, the Mulroney government implemented a number of the McGraw Committee's reports, as any good, responsive government would do who believes in ministerial accountability and democracy. The Mulroney government implemented a number of the McGraw Committee reports. I know, as Mr. MP Blakey knows, because I'm sure he had these discussions with his father, and including those that reduced the size of parliamentary committees, ensured continuity of committee membership in order to develop expertise and provide committees with their own budgets. And I know some of the staff here will really appreciate this one. The McGraw Committee report asked that the committees actually have research staff. And the Mulroney government agreed and implemented that. So I'll say that again. Membership ensured the continuity of committee membership, provided committees with their own budgets for research staff. They didn't exist before then. Committees didn't have research staff before then. And legal counsel as well when we need it. Of course, when you're dealing with laws, it's sometimes good to have legal counsel. The government also agreed that standing committees should have before them the full departmental policy array, including the department's objectives, the activities carried out in pursuit of those objectives, and the immediate and long-term expenditure plans for achieving them. Since 1993, further efforts have been made to enhance Parliament's capacity to hold the government to account by providing more timely and comprehensive information to Parliament with greater focus on results, if you can believe it. Now, the Government Operations and Estimates Committee was created in 2002. 2002, I believe, would have still been the Chrétien government, that the Prime Minister Chrétien was still in power before the internal coup that happened in the Liberal Party, where he was thrown out as a sitting Prime Minister and replaced by his Finance Minister, the ever-ambitious Mr. Dithers, Paul Martin. And the committee, this report from Treasury Board goes on page 18, for the sake of translators, this come to a new section. The role of the Auditor General. We know the Auditor General is critical in the ministerial accountability framework in our parliamentary system. And under this report that I'm sure all ministers have read, they need to understand the role of the Auditor General in their ministerial responsibilities. The first Auditor General, and no, I did not know the first Auditor General. The first Auditor General, John Langton, had responsibilities to both the government and Parliament as Deputy Minister of Finance and Secretary of the Treasury Board. So let me get this right. The first Auditor General was actually the Deputy Minister of Finance and Treasury Board. He was also responsible for the use of funds and for reporting to Parliament the results of his audits. Geez, this guy was a super bureaucrat, as it was called by then, famously in a book called The Super Bureaucrats about the Trudeau era, the first Trudeau era. He was a super bureaucrat, Auditor General, Deputy Minister of Finance, Secretary of the Treasury Board, and responsible to Parliament. That guy had a lot of meetings to go to in Parliament and a lot of meetings to go to the House. It sort of reminds me, no, I did not know him, but Sir John A. Macdonald's law partner was a guy named Sir Alexander Campbell, if you didn't know that, from Kingston. They were law partners. but he was also Sir John Hay's campaign manager. He was his campaign manager. And he did such a good job with Sir John A. in getting Sir John A. both elected in Kingston and the Islands.
Order, PS Beach.
Sorry, you're on a real roll. You're on page 17?
18.
Oh, we've moved to 18. So I've done some math, Mr. Chair, and I think we might need to ask the clerk a question. So, and that's at 55 pages?
Well, let me make sure I'm not including the bullet notes and the authors. I could read the authors too, but
So
it's
I
51.
had this current draft, 51, so it would be slightly less. You're about 22% through. So you're going to need, at your current pace, maybe 40 plus hours to finish. And then I don't know if there's another document, and I'm still excited to hear whether you're speaking.
I do have another document.
Oh, you do have another document?
But
Okay.
I may leave that to some of my colleagues.
That's good to know, and I was concerned because you've already mentioned that you might not necessarily be here on Friday. So as we search for resources for today, for
Yes.
Friday, potentially Monday, that timeline, even if we were able to get every available committee slot until the minister appeared,
Yes.
we'd be in trouble because now we'd have a minister who was here, but we'd still have an unresolved resolution. So, I mean, we've already canceled witnesses for the food bank and others, and I'm just inquiring as to the Conservative position on what we are going to do if we get to a point where we haven't resolved Mr. Perkins' wonderful contribution to our committee, just so that the minister can also prepare for her performance.
Thanks you, PS Beach, for that.
On the same
we're
point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, on the same point of order, MP Chambers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Beach raises an excellent question, actually, which is why, if we want to manage the committee appropriately, we would need to know, with respect to inviting witnesses, for how long the minister's available on Tuesday. So unless we find that answer out, I don't see how we can proceed at all. And so I don't know, as I hypothesized last week, if it was, I actually believe the minister wants to come for 2 hours. That's my own personal belief. But I think, as I mentioned last week, it was the Prime Minister's office who was a little uncomfortable about it for a whole bunch of reasons. But I think we need to know for how long she's available in order to appropriately manage the committee. I understand we have a question out to the minister's office. I'm quite happy to walk over there and ask. I know exactly where the building is, the James Michael Flaherty building. I know what floor it's on. I didn't work in that building, but I have been in it, and I'm happy to walk over there before question period. I will do that. But if we don't have an answer from the minister, I don't see how we'll have a resolution before the end of this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, MP Chambers.
My question was to the clerk.
Yep, the clerk.
This
is on the timings.
Well, just regarding the timing. So Mr. Perkins has already stated that he's probably got 30 or 40 hours left in him, maybe more, right? We've only got, let's call it 20 hours of slots between now and the minister arriving. So at what point do we just keep the invitation outstanding, or do we just wait and see what happens? Like, what's the standard practice?
I'm sure there are other members that want to speak as
yeah,
well.
go ahead.
There's other members
Yep.
that want to speak as well.
That is entirely the decision of the committee.
So we have to get to what you're saying is we have to get to a resolution, probably have a vote to figure out what the committee wants to do before we can make any decisions.
On the same point of order, Mr. Chair, I only speak for myself.
Same point of order, MP Chambers.
Thank you very much. I only speak for myself and not on behalf of my fellow colleagues. I would be prepared to provide UC for the minister to appear if she were to appear on Tuesday and suspend the debate that we currently have, but we would have to test that with the rest of the committee. And of course, as I say, I only speak for myself, and I might be a lone vote on that front, but there are ways in which this committee could arrange its affairs with unanimous consent to allow the minister to appear should she all of a sudden walk through those doors on Tuesday. We do not need to answer the question before she were to appear if we had unanimous consent.
So you would suspend debate, just for my own clarity, you would suspend debate on the motion to invite the minister in order to allow the minister to appear, and then you would resume debate on inviting the minister to appear?
If she hasn't appeared
Is that
for
what
2
you're
hours.
proposing?
I believe the minister's
If you want to
agreed
clarify
to
that,
appear
MP
on
Chambers.
Tuesday. So there we go.
The minister, for members again, the minister has emailed the committee and agreed to appear on Tuesday before our committee. So the minister is prepared to appear on May 16th.
I think I have my
before
answer,
our
Mr. Chair.
our
Thank
committee.
you.
Thank you, P.S. Beach. And just
on that point
listen,
of order-
guys. With resources, we're done. We're going to suspend now, and we're suspended.